Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzar-Ramosi Thurlow scale,
or MONS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello, and welcome back to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. My name is Chris Morgan. I am here with Jonathan Ian Manzar.
Hi, how you doing?
Scott Thurlow.
Dead or Alive, you're podcasting with me.
And Stephen Armosi.
Buy that podcast for $1.
And today we are discussing Paul Verhoeven's 1987 film RoboCop, starring Peter Weller and Nancy Allen. So, Ian, would you like to give us a funny logline?
Well, to be fair, I thought we were discussing presidential candidate Kanye West's song from the seminal album 808 and Heartbreak, RoboCop.
Well, I guess that's what you'll be reviewing, but
yeah,
the rest of us reviewing the 80s movie.
Must be like The Predator again. Predator. And Ian, why don't you continue with the plot, please?
All right, so it's the near future, or
20 minutes into the future, in
or right now in America. Detroit is a war zone. Gangs roam the streets. Corporations are trying to take over, and a cop gets gunned down, or gets transferred and gunned down, and is reborn by that corporation as RoboCop. But there's corporate shenanigans going on.
They're working with the criminals.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the RoboCop is RoboCop and gets revenge for his murder. Yeah.
I mean, it's a simple plot for sure, and I mean, and I've seen RoboCop a number of times, but this has been obviously the most recent time for a while that we're doing the review. So like, I would say the movie it hits the ground running like pretty quickly. Like it just like sort of tosses you into the shit that's happening. Peter Weller's character Murphy gets killed by the gang, like, I don't know, 20 minutes into it or so, and then is reborn as the cyborg RoboCop, etc., and like totally regains his memories and hunts down the criminals and stuff and figures out the corporate corruption. So like, I think, yeah,
you just gave you did a much better job of the pod.
But I mean, like, given all that, in light of that, I think it holds up pretty well. Like, I might be giving it a 3. I could see being talked down a little bit to a 2, but I'm not going below a 2. And I think because of the very fact that it just jumps you right in there, and it's simple enough but has enough weight behind it, I think it really works quite well and still holds up. So
what's interesting is this movie is structured like a superhero origin story.
Yeah, that's true.
And it has all of the act structure of one of those. It has the misfortune that he gains his superpowers. It's death and being reborn by a shady corporation. It's him on the rise. The big bad knocks him down. He has his low point, and then he regains his humanity by also embracing his newfound situation to conquer in the end. And it's very much that kind of superhero origin story type movie, except done as a kind of a sci-fi with a little bit more snark than usual.
Paul's trademark sort of shade in there, if you will.
Yeah, I think this plot structure does a really good job of going through that. Like you mentioned, it is kind of like a superhero origin story, while having like those strong themes that we're going to talk about in just a minute here. So I think I agree with you, Scott. I'm going to give this a 3.
I agree. It does a great job of world building. You definitely, 10 years later, you see where he went with Starship Troopers, because it starts off with a news segment to get the way things are on the world, like the Star Wars space platform, and they're talking about space exploration and private prisons and all that stuff. And then this heavily commercialized world which has obviously since become more relevant as with the rest of the story. I think it's really well paced as an origin story. You do get, it's almost like a comic in a way, because a lot of comics start off that way where they build the world. You'll see like news reports, and Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns uses media a lot to kind of help build the world. So yeah, I'm going to say it's a really strong movie. I'm going to give it a 3.
Yeah. Sorry, just one final thing for me. I think the pacing also is like perfectly spot on. There's not a wasted moment or a scene. Like nothing is there. Like, why did they do this? Like that could have been cut out. I don't think that's the case. So
I agree with a lot of what you guys said, but to me, a lot of those points everyone just made go into other aspects of this. The framework is well done, but what you remember from this are other questions later on. So I'm probably going to give this a strong 2.
I don't begrudge it.
But
Okay.
and perhaps it's being punished for what came after. And I'm so used to the media, and now I can't put this in the time when it came out. But I also know that there were a ton of kind of similar type movies out at that point too. So it feels like it didn't do anything new enough to, I think, warrant a 3. But thematically, stylistic qualities, that's where the points are going to go.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm still sticking with 3, but yeah. I mean, and if you didn't mention Chris, I'll just do a little plug, because we did do Starship Troopers like about a month back. So it's sort of like our follow-up, like double feature of Paul's like satirical takes on this kind of shit. So yeah.
Yeah, he does love those co-ed shower scenes, or like
I noticed that.
But yeah.
I mean, as somebody who was alive during who was in high school during the Reagan administration, and I did see this in the theater, and I saw Brazil in the theater, and to the level that they predicted the future is just unnerving. But you back in those days, 33 years ago, this was right before CNN. This is right before the Gulf War, before you had the 24-hour news service, where the media had started really taking off in a way that natural progression had. So I thought, I mean, more than nostalgically, I think they captured the time really, really well, which is what to me pushed it over into a 3. But again, that would be my perception and bias. So that was
okay.
Scott, why don't you move on with themes?
All right. So yeah, as you guys mentioned, I think the themes hold up quite a bit. It touches on maybe not a lot of things, but like 2 or 3 like important things. And yes, unfortunately, sadly, as you mentioned, Chris, perhaps they're more relevant than ever. But you've got the corporate corruption that's and the commercialization that's sort of only accelerated since the mid to late 80s, I would say. And then they're privatizing the police force, and and trying to. And actually, at least one of the senior VPs, or whatever, in the in Omni Consumer Products, to create like basically build a new Detroit, whatever they call it. Like I forget what the name of the city is, but like you got all that shit going on, and you got the cops. Like yes, while they are painted in a nobler light because of the times, like for the most part, they are in fact trying to do their job, and they're outmanned and outgunned essentially by the criminals run amok. So you've got that part of it, and you've got I don't remember the guy's name, Chris. Who's the guy who does the RoboCop like program, security head of whatever?
His name, it's Miguel Ferrer, and his name's Morton.
Yes. So you got him, like he's trying to get one over on his superiors in the company. Like, oh, I got this great idea. Like, I'm gonna sort of undermine my my competitors or my coworkers who are competing with for job attention and so forth, and like that. So they could sort of crisscross with his plan to militarize the police force more or less, and with his corporate sponsorship pretty much. So like I think it all holds up. It works like, and like I mentioned, it does have the trademark like Paul's social commentary about society like throughout. But I still think that shit holds up, and even like the world building too, like you mentioned, Chris, is really well done. Like course, the famous like I'd buy that for $1. Like that show, whatever that show is on. Like everyone's fucking watching it all the time. If they're either watching that or the news, pretty much. There's like nothing else. So like it's like that.
Or
like
commercials.
yeah, the mind numbingness of shit like that. That the general middle class like consumes. So I still think all that shit's there, and I think like it has a message to say. So I'm giving it a 1, and you guys can certainly expand upon all the things I said, but that's where I'm looking at, and that's how I'm going to score it. So
Yeah, I mean, clearly the thing that comes through the most is like the militarization, privatization of the police force, and kind of the ramping up of the weapons that they're using against their own citizenry and things like that. Especially like the part of the beginning where the guy gets blown away by the Ed 209 or whatever. Because they're rushing it out before it's ready to go. It's like reminds me so much of like, I mean, things that they do that they like send directly from the military to the police forces these days anyway, that aren't meant for policing citizens, things like that. But almost like it almost reminds me of like Boeing, like going out with their plane because they'd make more money. Even though it wasn't quite ready yet. But yeah, I think that it talks about all that stuff, like, capitalism being the driving force of policing your citizenry isn't probably the best way to go about things. And I think it does a really strong job with the themes.
When you said that there are a few laser-focused critiques that this is making, you were correct, and you guys covered it. So I'm going to agree with you. And let's, Chris. Yeah.
I'm just going to add gentrification, and I'm going to give it.
That's the word I want to use. Thank you.
Okay, so we're all giving that.
But that's interesting because the '80s, one of the big things was the idea of the multicultural gangs. So yeah, you have gentrification on the sense of classism, but not necessarily everyone gets along as long as we can riot together.
Right, but again, that is a trademark of the Reagan administration. Who brought us trickle down economics. So yeah, it is definitely class gentrification. We're all giving it a 1, and it moves to with the antagonist, and that antagonist would be Jones, played by Ronnie Cox. He is the head of the corporation. He's actually working with one of the gangs, so it's kind of an obvious. It's kind of the writer's hand here. It's a conceit where, you would have a powerful corporation in bed with, one of the bigger gangs, so you can kind of use them to feed on the fear to sell your product. But, the message is still there. It's, as with all things Verhoeven, there's a bit of cartoonish that goes into him as a villain, but I wouldn't say he's a mustache twirler. He is just he is a symbol of corporate America gone. Sorry, Scott.
You're right.
America, but I'll pass it on to you guys.
Yeah, he's fucking corrupt corporate executive, the trope, like 101. Like, like, you're right. Like, you understand his motivations. Be not that much to him, but you understand where he's coming from and what his goals are and how he's going about doing it. So yeah, you're right, Chris, as well. Like, he's not mustache trolling, but he's going to be the corrupt corporate executive because that's the role that he might as well be like one of the most standard examples of it. But it works, of course, because I think of what we just said about themes and the setting in general. So, like, I'm probably going to give him, like, a 1, like, a fine 1. He works more than he doesn't, and he serves his role, and, like, yeah, and antagonizes Murphy/Peter Weller. So
These are actually very common villains, whether you're dealing with the corporate ones or the gang members that are in the 80s. Yeah. But with a level of self-awareness over who these characters are, Verhoeven is kind of a master of taking the piss out of different styles, and he does it here. Like, it's almost a Captain Planet like villain, but like it's cartoonish, but at the same time it balances that like weird like Rocketeer or the kind of like it's somewhat realistic but still a little bit
It's exaggerated.
exaggerated, and yeah, it worked for me.
Yeah, I would almost say like the whole silo of the corporation is like the antagonist here. So you got like Jones, but you've also got Clarence, who is the one who really antagonizes, Murphy through the whole thing. Like he's the one that's
dragon.
actually. What's that?
In this, like, sorry, he's the dragon for the big bad.
Yeah, and you got Morton, Miguel Ferrer's character, who is really the like has him killed and then brings him back basically. So you have this whole like bunch of people that kind of add up to one big antagonist to me, which is the company itself is the actual antagonist. So which I give a strong one too. I think that, but I don't think that any of those characters, they all play a different part of the whole that really sticks it to Murphy in this,
Sure.
So I'm going to give them a 1 combined.
That's a good way to look at it. Like they all like sort of combine together the one like big like literal conglomerate, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all giving it a 1 then. And Steve-O, why don't you tell us a little bit about the protagonist?
Yeah. So you got RoboCop Murphy, who, there's not much to him. He's kind of like a blank-faced protagonist after he's killed and turned into the actual protagonist of the movie, and turned into a RoboCop. He has little moments of like humanity that are really important to this film, and I do like that he's kind of like a blank slate that the other characters project themselves onto a little bit, like what's her name, Lewis, and then his partner comes out and like is trying to figure him out, but I think a lot of that is her like working through her own shit about her partner being murdered like in front of her and stuff like that. So
and the 500 other cops have been killed in the past week in Detroit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. It's an interesting question because like him as a character, he's got some interesting stuff to him, but he's kind of lets the rest of the movie bounce off of him to a degree, and like I don't know. I think I'm going to give it a 1 probably still because he works really well in that role and in that part of the movie. But go ahead.
I'm going to agree with Roger Ebert here. So I was doing a little bit of research into what the current at that moment and what they felt, and he said that Wells's acting, especially for a man who was basically face covered in prosthetics or costumes, actually has a lot of pathos throughout this, and that you're right that it would have been an easy role to make really bland, and we see that in like modern Dread stuff and things like that. But this one, you actually have a feeling for what's RoboCop's actual name in this?
Murphy.
Yeah, and he does have reactions, and as he gains his memory back, and Wells does a really good job with what little he has to act with of acting here, and I think it's actually a very well done portrayal. So I'm probably going to give it 1.
Yeah, I don't know much more than that. I agree with almost everything you guys have said. I've always liked Peter Weller, even though I might prefer him in Buckaroo Banzai, as we made the joke. Right?
Weller, not Wells.
You said Wells. That doesn't matter. Well, yeah, I know what you meant. You meant him. And yeah, like I think that is true. Like because he is covered, like with basically a visor, essentially, like for 80% of the movie, but he does, at least project emotions. Even so, and yeah, he might have like a simpler arc, but like he has a fine backstory, which like you said, Steve-O, makes sense. Like you get bits of his, his family and what happened there, and that sort of like comes into play when it triggers his memories, like when he's dreaming about them, and then goes to his old house and so forth. And yeah, he does a good job throughout, and it's a perfect protagonist for that fits into the film that that Verhoeven was trying to make. So I'm giving it a 1.
I think one of the great strengths and one of the great choices with regard to his character was not to have the home life. Because in my mind, I haven't seen this for quite some time, and I thought they introduced Murphy like leaving his house, and he mentioned his wife and his kid, and set up a couple things, but you don't really get a chance to see his life.
Yeah, it's just pretty flashes,
which was a smart thing to do, because all of a sudden this blank slate of a character just starts. Because as you said, Steve-O, I mean, here's a guy in a mask who things bounce off of him, but to be able to build his backstory throughout the film was a real smart choice to make, and made him an effective protagonist. So I agree with you guys 100%. I'm giving him a 1 as well.
Yeah, I like that.
Alrighty, and Ian, let's move on to supporting.
Well, Steve-O put all of the corporation into an antagonist, where I think that there are several members of the corporation that escape that, even though they're bad. And it's interesting because you can, as you watch this movie, you can see where like, oh, I can see how this can become a series, how they can make take characters from this movie and update them to having a part in the RoboCop lore. So the nerdy black guy in the corporate thing, he seems like he's becoming an ally of RoboCop and would probably take over as it goes forward. So you have a picture of not only a world that they've built, but also a world that could be moved forward with characters that kind of leave impressions for what can go with them. The female police officer, I'm terrible.
Her name is Lewis.
Lewis, yeah. Another article I read was talking about how much 80s action movies were terrible with the portrayal of women. I actually thought she did a really good job here. Like, it was just tough. Her introduction is her kicking ass. And in general, she takes down. Yeah, she has more of a kind of a sidekick role to if I'm using the hero thing, but she takes out Clarence's second in command with a good shot from while wounded. So like, and then also all the wacky
gang members and shit,
and commercials and like that entire the entire world they built worked well for the themes, and I think that's one of the strengths of this movie.
Yeah, so this one I was a little bit like iffy on, because I do agree, like maybe the world building elements and characters is what's going to push me over the line for a 1, because like like Lewis is good. Sorry, Chris, what's her actress name? Nancy something. Yeah, so like she was very good, and like a good portrayal within like the setup that they had. So, but for the most part, like I mean, even fucking who plays Clarence Darrow? He's fucking Red from 70s Show.
Kurtwood Smith.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I'm saying, but his gang members are so right. So like, so unless I could lump them all into antagonists, which doesn't leave much. But I still think the world building elements of the like the random like the people basically reminded me. Sorry, real quickly, Chris. It kind of reminded Repo Man, where like every store apparently in Detroit is always getting robbed like all the time.
Yeah.
By the same gang members. So like whatever, like what all that stuff works, I think you're right. So to create like a greater sense of the world and setting itself, that I think I'm gonna settle on a 1 for this one.
I wanted to just quick mention something when Ian was talking about Lewis, and you have a world where it's very flashy, very commercial based, lacks a lot of humanity. And Lewis's character brings that humanity. I mean, she's the one person, she only knew him for a day, but is the one person who actually cares about Murphy, the person. And I think that makes her character definitely worthwhile. And I don't really want to give spoilers away to an upcoming show that we'll have next month, but Ian was talking about an actor in that he did a review of, John Saxon. You wish he had chewed up more screen time. Kurtwood Smith just eats the table and like
Sure.
any furniture in the room using. So I'm giving it a strong 1. I mean, again, that you said, Scott, about the world building, but really, Lewis's character was really important.
Yeah, you're right. She's like the heart of it. Yeah, agreed.
Siva?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Lewis is the most important supporting character, of course. You got the sergeant who's like, kind of taking his cues from the company. I thought he was good. I'm trying to think of who. Like, I do love a good like colorfully packed gang of like thugs. Like all of them. Like you got this movie, you got like The Crow, you got like all these types of movies or like Warriors or whatever. A good crew like that is always good when they have when you kind of remember each one of the characters.
Actually, by concentrating on the 5 crew members or however many there were, it was actually benefited to that each of them kind of at least had a distinct personality style that you remember. Other movies in the 80s would just have like 30 people in a gang, and maybe one of them you'd remember. This one, I actually a distinct. Even at the end, I'm like, oh, the Asian gang member, did he die earlier on? Because why isn't he in the reunion thing?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I was like, where did this one character go of random gang member number 3? So
yeah, that's a good point. It's funny, but I think it's for 1.
Yeah, I did. I enjoyed them. Trying to remember if there's anybody else that I'm leaving out. That we're leaving out.
ED 209.
Yeah, true. The old Ed 209. So just a robot, but it had its own kind of personality.
Research team, even though they're brief, a lot of them have personality to them.
Character to them.
True. Yeah, it's gonna be a 1 for me for sure.
And I'd be remiss, like one of my favorite deaths in film history was Emil, played by, and it was like with the whole Toxic Avenger, like all the radioactive material causing mutations, was really continuing from the 50s into the 80s. So he drives into a toxic waste container, and he starts
melting and mutating. Yeah.
Like running around going, and then Kurtwood just runs him over and he explodes.
Yeah, it looks like a trash bag filled with like slime just explodes all over his car.
Yeah,
it's fucking hilarious.
You're right. That is funny, and it's pretty classic. That's right. Like the second like that he starts to drive, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's the most over-the-top death in this, because every other gang member
cartoonish thing.
Dies from like a gunshot or an explosion. This guy has a traumatic death.
And they build it up. They really play it for all it's worth. Like, it's not like he just walks out and gets hit. He's just like, that was really...
You're right. That is funny, but yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Credit to the film.
So that moves on to dialogue with Scott.
All right, this one I'm also a little iffy on as well. Like, yes, there are the famous lines like that we already referenced pretty much. And like, I guess what I want to say is that like it all holds together. There's nothing really cringeworthy or like anything that's over the top is like done so on purpose. Like it's, clearly the vision they had in mind is to have this character say something not ridiculous per se, but like, for example, the confrontation in the corporate bathroom, like it's a little like too much, but like they know that. And I think they lean into that. And like other moments like that are similar to it throughout, like it's not amazing, but I guess I have to say like it works and it doesn't like falter, I don't think, or it doesn't really like there are no parts that fall so flat that make me say, oh, it didn't work more than it did. So I guess I'm gonna go with a solid a fine 1, unless you guys have something else to say about it. So go ahead.
No, I tend to agree with you on that. I think that the dialogue's pretty good, and this movie's pretty quotable as well. Like, we've been saying I'd buy that for $1 all night, and like,
sure,
You know,
Oh, has everyone been saying that since that movie? But I'm saying,
yeah, you know, there are a lot of quotes that came from this movie that, you know, it's sticks in your head. So I think that's a mark of pretty good dialogue usually. And like you said, there's nothing like cringeworthy in there to me. So I'm gonna give it a 1.
Ian?
I was kind of ambivalent towards this one. Like I could have gone with the 0 or 1. I was waiting to hear what you guys had to say, and I'm kind of, I guess, falling upon the 1 because it's, yeah, aside from a couple of lines, it's okay. But you're right, it's not bad. I don't know. I was teetering, but you guys kind of
I think it like
confirmed going over to a 1.
it's like good enough for a 1. You know.
I actually was starting with a 0 with this one, because when I think back in the film, this is one of those things where I'm going to say the whole is better than the sum of the parts in a lot of ways, because when I think of the film, the dialogue is, even the I'll buy it for $1 is not the thing I remember the most. It's the themes, it's the atmosphere. But you all made a really good point for dialogue. I was also going to say, I'm not sure if this is quite the 10 movie that Troopers was, but I also can't fault, because, well, the Troopers dialogue, we were talking about how everything in that film just fed into the world. The dialogue carried so much weight, but I think in this case, it's like the dialogue does its job.
Yep, I think that's well said. Like that's pretty much how I ended up looking at it, and that means it does its job. So it does its job enough for a 1.
Chris, you might have swapped me on this.
Okay, really.
Because we're looking at the entirety of his work. And I think that Starship Troopers is a better film because that was none of the very few of the actors were in on the joke. It was played straight. This was attempting to be funny. And yeah, there were moments it worked, but you're right. The most of it, this isn't the stuff you remember. Like you remember the visual aspects. You remember the like, aside from a couple of lines in what was intentionally meant to be a kind of a funny movie, it didn't land as much. So I'm probably going to give it a land on a 0 for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the thing is, I don't want that 0 to be a mark against it, more so than, hey, going into Starship Troopers, which was as much political commentary, social commentary as this is, I kind of felt like definitely without this film, there could have been no Starship Troopers. And I think that, you know, I think really making the dialogue work, and that was something that was approved upon from this. So yeah, I'm going to stick with my 0.
Yeah, that's fair. I get it. I see your guys' point. I don't begrudge it, but I think maybe it's just enough for me. But I could have seen myself giving it as well. But I'm going to stick with the decent 1.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the 1 too. I think for me, it's the what really pushes it just over the line is kind of the quotability of the movie and stuff like that's sticking in your head.
It's longevity. Sure.
Yeah.
And that moves me to style, and in keeping with when I first saw this in the theater, I was kind of found the abrupt ending jarring, but Ian putting it in context of an origin story was absolutely perfect, because the end of Batman Begins, which
I knew you were gonna fucking compare that.
My 2 favorite origin stories are Batman Begins and the 1978 Superman, and in both of them, the sign off as a superhero, like in Batman Begins, saying I never thank you, you'll never have to. And I can't remember, Christopher Reeve says something like, we're all in this together, something similar. And to have Dan O'Hurley, he's saying, what's your name? And he just turns around and goes, Murphy, and like walks off and it faces.
Yep.
That alone would give this a 1. But I think the culmination of everything we were talking about, with the narrative, with the world building, is enough to give it a 1. I really enjoyed the stop motion, and I'm going to move it on because I don't really want to step on anybody else's toes.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think it holds up. Like, when you think of 80s, or rundown cities, like crime infested things, like RoboCop, probably is in the top 10 or 5 of things you think of because it portrayed that really well, and I think it still holds up. Like all the shots are fine. Like I will say, I guess my biggest gripe stylistically is like some of the fights and like the actual random gang members' deaths. Like they basically have Wilhelm screams like off a fucking ledge or whatever. Like, it kind of looks a little ridiculous at times when that happens, but by and large, and I still the ED stop motion thing, like I think still looks pretty good. It still holds up fairly well. Even the RoboCop stuff design itself also I think stands the test of time. So yeah, in general, I think it's stronger than it. Any faults in it are like few and far between. So I'm gonna give it a pretty solid 1, and I'll leave also other points for you guys. So
The commercials are what sold me. Specifically, the one where they're playing the nuke each other board game, which is so perfectly cynical of the Cold War. It's wonderful. I think the style is actually the strength. If there's a reason to go watch this film, it's because of the stylistic choices in the world they built, more than anything.
Yeah, I mean that is the really, and like in the 80s when this came out, this was like RoboCop was the epitome of cool like near future sci-fi stuff.
exactly.
And it kind of built this, and like maybe Blade Runner and a couple others like built what a sci-fi future was in a film. And it still looks good. The practical effects are amazing. The stop motion stuff is just like silly, but I really still love it. And like watching the Ed 209 trying to get down the stairs and not be able to do it like a cow or something. Like cows can't go upstairs or whatever that is, but like, or down them. But yeah, that's I don't know. I just love all of it. And you're right. The how they do the news segments and the commercials are great.
That shit's
Yeah, superior like social commentary through the style, and yeah, I love it. It's a 1.
Excellent. And
oh, sorry. Did anyone mention the soundtrack? Because I guess it was
no,
there, but like it wasn't like the biggest part of it. I just thought one of you might bring it up. That's why I was saving it. But
that's actually a good point, because the RoboCop like theme that plays is super iconic.
The theme is cool, but
yeah. And the soundtrack is good. Like I enjoyed it, or like the score.
I just didn't remember it. Like even like you just watch it and it was there. I'm sure there was music, but it sort of like was just in the background, perfectly fine. Like neither distracting nor adding really much to me. So
I think they did do a great job with the leitmotif of the theme though, coming back up.
That piece of music is good. I'll grant you that.
Yeah. But yeah, so.
And Steve-O, continue. Would you recommend RoboCop?
Yes, I'm going to give it a 10 apparently. I think it's a great movie. I actually agree, or I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday when I saw you guys. It's not quite as good as Starship Troopers, but you're right, Chris. Starship Troopers doesn't exist without this movie. And going back and watching it, I still really enjoyed it. I give it a strong recommendation.
Yes. I mean, I'm giving it a 1 as well. Obviously,
all right, sure. I mean, yeah, I still recommend RoboCop. It holds up, I think. And yeah, I guess I'm giving it a 10. I might not have done that like on an arbitrary scale, but on our scale, on the points that I think it hits clearly almost all of them, if not all. So yeah, and yeah, it's still worth a watch. And there's nothing, if you haven't seen it in a while, and you're like, oh, I wonder if does RoboCop still work? Yep, it fucking does. And check it out. So
I think if you haven't seen RoboCop, your perception of RoboCop is completely incorrect. It is a strange and fun movie. It's overall it does hold up, but it's worth watching just for the humorous part in it. I don't think it's a must-see movie, but it's a good like Saturday afternoon fun kind of romp. So
all right.
that's a 1.
All right. So
that leave us, buddy.
Scott and Steve-O gave it each a 10. I gave it a 9, and Ian gave it an 8. Ian gave the plot a strong 2, and Ian and I both agreed that the dialogue was not the strongest, where you guys did, which is awesome. And that leaves us with a 9.25, which, if we gave,
That's about spot on you.
I was gonna say, if we gave Troopers a 10, this, I think this is right in the ballpark for RoboCop.
Yep, I'm with you. Being the precursor, and like I said, like I might give it a 9.25 on the arbitrary number scale. So there you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, does anybody have anything to add?
No, I think that'll do it, buddy.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I have been Chris Morgan here with Stephen Hermosi,
Have a good night.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Since you asked, the Warriors is a par with this, and Death Wish 3.
Okay. All right. They're all up there. All right.
And Scott Thurlow.
And yeah, I'll see you in the ruins of Detroit next time. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
Night.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.
Or Mott's?